When his great love is captured by a snake charmer, Ajar and his friends embark on a dangerous journey to cross the desert and rescue Eva. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Sahara, from 2017. During a sandstorm in the middle of the desert, two men and their camels hide behind a large rock while waiting for an opportunity to continue their journey. When the winds have subsided, Ajar, a desert snake, and his scorpion friend come out of hiding and take a watermelon for dinner. However, a few minutes later, they are attacked by Saladin, who strikes the two friends to steal the food. Later, while Saladin and his gang devour the watermelon, Ajar and Pit are machine-gunned with the seeds and have to hide to avoid being hit by the snakes. Tired of being humiliated by Saladin, Ajar decides to leave the place, but Pit says that desert snakes and scorpions are not welcome to live in the oasis. Just then, Ajar sees a beautiful green snake coming out of the forest, but it ends up being captured by a bird. Instead of devouring her, Chef takes Eva back to her family and she hears a lecture from her father, who forbids her to go out and venture into the desert. Michael is the richest and most influential snake in the oasis and informs them that the Spencers will be visiting them that night to take their son, John, to meet Eva. When she hears this, the young snake is furious and says that she can no longer stand living in that place, having to follow her father's rules. Just then, Gary appears with a wig on his head and starts making fun of his sister. He then tells his father that he's going out to meet some friends. Meanwhile, Ajar decides to take a mud bath to try and pass himself off as a green snake so that he can enter the oasis without being chased. He is determined to meet that beautiful snake he saw trying to get out of the forest, and Pit decides to accompany him on this adventure. As soon as he enters the oasis, Ajar is approached by Chef and the bird tells him that it is not a safe zone as he is too close to the border. After warning him about the desert snakes, Chef asks the reptile to go deeper into the forest and, when he leaves, Pit comes out of hiding to accompany his friend. As they walk through this place full of trees and waterfalls, the pair feel as if they are getting to know a completely different world and can hardly believe that all this exists just a few meters away from where they live. However, when he hears the bird sounding an invasion alert, Pit panics, believing that Ajar has been unmasked. He immediately runs off into the forest and the two friends end up losing each other. While looking for the scorpion, Ajar comes across Eva, whose skin is covered in mud. Now that she is no longer her natural color, she has been mistaken for a desert snake and is being chased by the guards. During the escape, Eva is almost eliminated by a human, but Ajar manages to save her and Pit uses his poison to take the man down. As they try to escape through the woods, they end up being surrounded by Chef on the edge of the cliff and Eva decides to jump into the waterfall with Ajar. What she didn't realize was that the young snake can't swim, so she has to save him from drowning. Immediately, the bird goes after them and, as they are carried away by the current, they both recover their natural color. When she discovers that Ajar is a desert snake, Eva despairs and decides to abandon him in the water. Luckily, he manages to hold onto a branch and get out of the waterfall. Now that she has finally made it out of the oasis, Eva asks what Ajar was doing inside and is shocked to discover that he intended to live in the forest. According to Eva, it's a terrible place and she has no plans to return. When she realizes that the desert snakes are not as dangerous as her father said, she feels more comfortable around Ajar and then Pit appears. The trio is hiding under a rock, but when she realizes that she has managed to lose the guards, Eva decides to go out and explore the new world. However, as soon as she comes out of hiding, she is captured by a human and imprisoned in a straw basket. Immediately, Ajar tries to save her, but is also captured by Chef and, while trying to help his friend free himself, Pit ends up being taken with him. As punishment for invading the oasis, Chef orders the guards to eliminate the pair and Gary shows up just in time. Eve's brother had spent the night sniffing pollen grains and was sleeping nearby. At this point, he ends up being captured by Ajar, who orders the birds to take him back to the desert. After riding the sergeant, the snake manages to escape, but is followed by the other guards and Pit throws Gary's wig to lose them. After getting rid of the security guards, Ajar decides to go after Eva, who is now many kilometers away from home. She has been recruited, against her will, to Miss Rita's ballet company and begins to cry when she realizes that she is lost. At this point, the twins Lily and Lulu try to console her and end up making matters worse. After a few minutes of relentless searching, Ajar finally finds the group that captured Eva and decides to go down to save her. However, Gary prevents him from doing so, as he knows that the humans will eliminate them immediately. While the two snakes are arguing, Pit ends up falling and the sergeant has to dive in to rescue him. However, the scorpion accidentally pierces the bird with its stinger and it falls asleep. The group ends up in the middle of the desert and Ajar decides to continue his journey on dry land. So Gary tries to wake up the sergeant so that he can take him back home, but the bird remains in a deep sleep. Afraid of being alone in that hostile place, Gary decides to accompany his two friends and the trio enter a labyrinth of rocks. While trying to find the way out, Gary then ends up falling into a hole and the pair also end up inside while searching for him. That night, while taking a rest break, Omar decides to introduce his snakes to the other travelers accompanying him and uses a flute to control them. During the dance show, Eva takes advantage of everyone's distraction and runs away, but when she hears the melody, she is hypnotized and her body begins to move involuntarily. At this point, the young snake does her first dance and later, when she returns to the basket, she wonders what happened, because she doesn't know how she learned to do those movements. Meanwhile, Ajar, Pit and Gary try to get out of the hole they fell into and find a cave full of glowing maggots. There, they are welcomed by their host, who decides to help them find the path of the camels. According to the larva, if the trio follow the polar star, they will soon find the group of camels they are looking for. However, before saying goodbye to his guests, the host invites them to dinner and Ajar kindly accepts the invitation. However, it's not long before they realize they're the main course and try to escape. When Gary is hit by the goo, he gets stuck and, in trying to help him, Pit ends up being captured too. At this point, Ajar spots an exit and has to be very careful not to get hit by the goo as he climbs the stone wall in order to move a rock that is loose. As they do so, sunlight floods into the cave and the maggots flee in fright, so Ajar and his companions manage to escape. After climbing out of the hole, they finally reach the other side of the labyrinth and Ajar decides to follow the camel tracks to find Eva, but Gary says he wants to go home. He is convinced that his sister has already been devoured by some desert creature and says that it is not worth them risking their lives to try to save her. Despite not liking Gary very much, Pit agrees with Gary this time, but Ajar is not willing to give up on finding his great love and decides to continue his journey. So Pit decides to accompany his friend and Gary goes after them so that he doesn't have to return alone. Over the next few days, Eva tries to get used to her new life and starts training with the other members of the ballet company. After spending several hours crawling through the hot desert sand, Gary can hardly move his own body, but he'd rather follow the duo than face the way back without company. One morning, the trio meet a couple of tourists who have stopped to take some photos and decide to hitch a ride with them. After entering the vehicle, the animals hide under the seat, but the plan goes awry when Gary sees some flowers and comes out of hiding to smell the pollen grains. When they see him, the tourists panic and Gary ends up being captured by the driver. Frightened, Ajar and Pit try to escape, but the man manages to hold on to the desert snake with his bare hands. After being hit by a bottle, the scorpion ends up infected with its own venom and falls asleep. At that moment, the driver throws the two snakes out of the vehicle and Pit ends up inside alone. Furious, Ajar blames Gary for everything that has happened and says that, because of him, his only friend will be crushed by the humans. However, Gary is hallucinating and just agrees with everything Ajar says. Suddenly, he is attacked and decides to use his kung fu moves to fight back. At this point, Ajar realizes that Gary can barely react to anything, so he decides to leave him alone and continue his rescue mission. The plan now consists of saving Eva and then going after Pit. During the trip, Miss Rita helps Eva and George practice their choreography and the young snake realizes that she is beginning to fall in love with her dance partner. While watching the rehearsal, Rita reveals that it has taken her 20 years to perfect her technique and Eva is shocked to discover that she has been locked inside that basket for so long. Eva then asks how many years George has been stuck there and he reveals that he has been part of the ballet company for 11 years. When she hears this, the young snake realizes how much trouble she's in and Pietra takes advantage of this moment of fragility to get close to her. Since Eva appeared, the white snake has lost its prominence as the star of the dance, so she decides to help her escape to regain her place. That morning, Pietra shows the newcomer the hole she made in the bottom of the basket and says that all the snake has to do is jump into the sand. According to Pietra, when Omar misses Eva, she will be long gone. However, when the young snake prepares to jump, she ends up being caught by the camels and they send out a warning signal. After almost being trampled, Eva is kicked and faints. At that moment, Pietra goes out to see what has happened to her and they both end up being captured by Omar. They are then sent to another basket, where the man places the rebellious snakes that will be transformed into fashion accessories. Just as he was about to throw them in, the man came up with the idea of having a duel so that the snakes could fight for their lives. At this point, Ajar and Gary are completely lost and come across a Saharan lizard that moves under the sand. The snakes then ask him if he has seen a group of camels walking there and the animal reveals that they are on their way to Soukville, a small 15th century town protected by huge walls. However, when asked where this place is, the reptile dives into the sand and quickly runs away. Frustrated, Gary once again tries to convince Ajar to give up his mission and the two end up fighting again. During the fight, The snakes spot an oasis a few meters away and decide to spend the night there to recover from their long journey. That morning, while the camels sleep, Omar performs a ritual with Eva and Pietra, in which only one of them will survive. In a circle of fire, they take part in a competition where the best dancer will win a new chance to continue in the ballet company and the other will be turned into a shoe. While dancing, Pietra ends up falling and Eva manages to win. After spending several hours trapped inside the vehicle, Pitt finally manages to get out and decides to take a nap in the driver's shoe. Shortly afterwards, he hears a noise and sees a family of scorpions approaching the camp. So that night, Pitt has the opportunity to make new friends and manages to win Emily's heart with stories of his heroic adventures. The next morning, when he wakes up, Ajar finds that Gary is not by his side and goes out to look for him. As he approaches a well, he hears his friend's voice and the Evis brother reveals that this underground river brings water to the surrounding towns, including Soukville. Gary's idea is to get in there and hitch a ride with the current to get there. That way, they won't have to crawl through the scorching sand to find his sister. However, since he can't swim, Ajar suggests that they continue traveling on the surface, even though he knows that it will take them several days to reach their destination. Just then, Gary spots a strong sandstorm approaching, so the pair have no choice but to escape through the underground river. They hitch a ride in a bucket and Ajar gets seasick as he is carried away by the strong current. What the pair didn't realize was that the path is strewn with rocks and, when they collide with a large boulder, they end up being thrown out of the bucket. After falling into the water, the snakes have to swim and, as planned, they end up in Soukville. Ajar is relieved to have survived and now they both need to find shelter to hide from the sandstorm that is approaching the city. While crawling through the streets, they come across a poster of Omar and his snakes, so Ajar climbs onto the roof to break into the guy's store. When he sees a bunch of flowers, Gary is mesmerized, but gives up the pollen grains to go and save his sister. Upon entering the store, the pair come across numerous snake scales hanging up and start looking for Eva. When he finds her, Ajar sees his beloved embracing George, who tries to console her for Pietra's perishment. Although jealous, he helps Gary free Eva, who is extremely happy to see Ajar and his brother. In an attempt to get to the snake farm, the two friends jump on the ceiling fan and Gary ends up being thrown against the wall. Just then, Omar hears the noise and goes to investigate to find out who broke into his store. However, Ajar manages to act faster and removes the screw that holds the fan to the ceiling. When the object falls, the basket is destroyed and all the snakes manage to escape. Eva then runs to hug Ajar and thanks him for coming to her rescue. While the snakes hide, Gary attacks Omar and manages to bite him, but his venom isn't strong enough to eliminate a human. Determined to recover all the snakes, the man rushes to get his flute, because he knows that this way he will be able to control them. However, before he can carry out his plan, Ajar steals the instrument and flees the store immediately. When he gets outside, he can't see anything because the sandstorm is covering the whole city. When he realizes that he is being chased, Ajar jumps off the roof and is carried by the wind to the terrace of the neighboring building. At this point, Omar tries to reach him, but is surprised by an even stronger gust of wind and the snake is carried away by the wind. Ajar flies aimlessly through the city until he crashes into an old building. When he opens his eyes, he comes across Omar, who is still trying to catch him in the storm. Luckily, the snake manages to escape through the side of the building and crawls away. Once again, however, the man manages to find it and captures Ajar. Just then, Omar's store sign covers the man's eyes and he has to let go of the animal in order to remove the paper from his face. When he is freed, Ajar is blown away again and uses his tail to cling to a metal structure at the top of a tower. Seeing that the snake is still holding his flute, Omar continues after it and climbs the tower in order to retrieve his instrument. Then, when he tries to pull out the flute, it breaks and Omar is furious. Seized by hatred, he seeks revenge on the snakes and Ajar becomes his first target. When the man jumps to catch the snake, it manages to dodge and the snake charmer ends up falling. At that moment, he manages to grab onto Ajar's tail and they both hang from the tower. The snake then uses its teeth to hold onto the metal structure and prevent him from falling, but he screams in pain as his skin begins to tear and Omar ends up falling. Then Ajar can no longer hold on and suffers a tragic accident. When the storm is over, Eva and her brother go to look for him and find the reptile buried under several planks of wood. The young snake immediately helps him free himself. But Ajar is unconscious and Eva begins to cry because she believes he is eliminated. But soon afterwards, the snake starts breathing again and Eva feels relieved. Now that he has changed his skin, Ajar has beautiful scales and his friends celebrate the fact that he is alive. Suddenly, the trio is surprised by the arrival of Omar and prepares for battle, but Pitt manages to resolve the situation quickly by using his stinger to knock out the human. When he meets the Scorpion again, Ajar is extremely happy and says that he missed him a lot. After hugging his friend, Pit introduces Emily, his new girlfriend, who has decided to leave her family to accompany him. That afternoon, the group hitchhikes back to the Sahara and discovers that Pietra has not been eliminated, as Eva had imagined. The snake decides to start a new life far away from the city and gets closer to Gary when she discovers that he is the heir to a great fortune. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.